I'm running a Lancer campaign with my wife, and our upcoming battles are going to be held in
deep space.
But space can be kind of, well, empty. We not only need something that would provide cover for units on the field, but an objective as well. I decided to make an asteroid with a station built into it. I call this the Asteroid FOB. This will be accompanied by some smaller asteroids which will act as scatter terrain. Relax while I show you how I went about making these fancy floating rocks. The asteroid FOB will comprise of two components: the asteroid itself, which will be made of aluminum foil and modeling clay, and the various structures that will give it the impression of being a base constructed within an asteroid. I planned on keeping this dead simple, exclusively using various pieces of scrap rather than building a complicated structure. The clay I used required baking in the oven to harden, so this saved me from having to figure out what materials I could safely integrate into the asteroid. Let's go over some of the junk I picked out, shall we? These caps covered a DisplayPort and USB cable at some point, and I think they'll make good structures for habitation. These domes, which came from a Battletech dropship, could serve as turrets or perhaps greenhouses in a less military-oriented station. However, this station, gonna blow things up, so turrets it is. The support beams left over from a 3D print will make good towers, though I'll have to be careful with them as they are quite fragile. I also have this thing from a failed brush stand print that I decided I could put to use here. What could it be used for? Who knows? But I think it looks vaguely space station-like. To begin building my asteroid, I crumbled a decent chunk of aluminum foil into a roundish, random shape. Stop thinking that. I know what you're thinking.
Stop it. Get some help.
Then I took my modeling clay and started applying it to the foil. I did my best to press each piece of clay into about a 1/4 inch thickness before wrapping it onto the foil. And I didn't worry too much about foil breaking the surface. I also tried not to press too hard to preserve the shape of the foil. At this point, what we have doesn't look particularly appetizing, but we're gonna take care of that in a minute. I went over the whole asteroid with molding tools and fine-tuned the shape to smooth out as many of those finger and palm prints as possible. Gloves were a must at this point, or I'd just be creating fresh prints as I went, though the wrinkles in the gloves made a few prints of their own. With the asteroid shaped, I planned out where I wanted to place the various structures. Some of the placement was obvious given the orientation I had planned for the asteroid. The most questionable placement for me was the fragile resin towers. I didn't want them both just standing straight up, so I'm taking a risk in having one of the two jut out horizontally. Sure, in space direction is arbitrary. This is up, this is up, this is up. Let's hope none of the players get overzealous moving their minis next to the asteroid. The final touch of the asteroid's shape is to add some craters of various sizes. For this, I used a marble that was glued to a small piece of dowel and a ball bearing. I wetted them to keep them from sticking to the clay, then pressed them into the clay with random placement. I varied the pressure to get craters of different depths. Now we have something a little more rock-like. Time to get this into the oven to harden. The clay I used hardens after baking for 30 minutes per 1/4 inch of material at a temperature of 275 degrees Celsius. Fahrenheit, not Celsius, that would be wicked hot. I probably thinned the clay more than a 1/4 inch in many places in an attempt to get it all over the foil, but I'd rather overbake than underbake, so 30 minutes in the oven and...
It's massively overbaked though, because it's rock solid and it shouldn't be like that.
Well, Paul, I was baking rocks, so... Once the asteroid cooled down, I set to fixing the structural elements into place. As I'd kept everything simple, this was just a matter of applying super glue in the right spots and letting the pieces set. There were a few pieces I ended up cutting down so they didn't protrude quite as much from the asteroid, and this guitar string needed to be made to fit in the planned spot. Then, with absolutely no finesse, I took apart this fancy desiccant to make use as a sort of vent thing. Maybe I'll be able to make use of the silica and charcoal at some point, but for now it's going straight into storage with all the other trash I like to collect. That's all the parts in place. Time to move on to painting. I primed using Chaos Black, forcing me outside into the below freezing temperatures. Thankfully, the cold didn't affect the prime coat at all. To paint, I mixed cheap black and cream acrylic paints that I got at a department store just to get a slightly warm gray. With this, I painted the entirety of the rock, avoiding the structures but not worrying if I got some on them. Then I used my lead belcher to apply a heavy dry brush over all the rock. This made the asteroid feel like it had a high heavy metal content. That's the rock all painted up. Moving on to the structures. I opened my Administratum Gray and started to base coat all the structures. I chose this lighter gray as it's important the structures stand out from the surrounding rock. For these domes, I decided to paint only half the panels to give them some character. For these two bits, I decided to paint windows to give them a lived-in feel. I used masking tape to block out some rows, then filled the base shapes of the window using Calidor Sky. From there, I mixed a lighter shade of blue to brighten up the top right corner of the window, finishing off with a dot of straight white. To add just an extra sense of depth, I added a second, ideally smaller dot of white on the bottom left corner of the window. Wait for it to dry and rip off the masking tape. I have some half-decent windows. They aren't perfect, and they look a little out of place without any additional details to give them context. That said, I don't think anyone will be guessing what they are, and I need to get this asteroid table ready quickly, so I'll be moving on. The last thing I did was go around all the structures and add some quick and dirty edge highlighting, just to give those structures a little more pop. And with that, I had painted it up to my satisfaction for being table ready. All I needed at this point was to add some clear acrylic stands, just to give it that feeling of floating above the battlefield.
Now it's time to take a look at the final product.
This asteroid will be the centerpiece of my battle map, but it won't be alone. I created about a dozen smaller asteroids of various sizes that will litter the field. The batch of little asteroids can be made in about an hour using the same techniques as the asteroid station. Some might even move and smack unsuspecting lancers around. So there you have it, an easy project to provide some character to a deep space battle. If you're interested in more simple builds like this, or you want to see what other shenanigans I get up to, think about getting subscribed.